Jones. We'll do some introductions here in just a moment, but excited to have the founder of Jazz Networks and team here today to talk about the new element of cybersecurity and how to properly find and detect insider threat. Right, where we're going to dig deep into that. You know, it's interesting that a lot of the folks within this company have come from the AV world, or at least spent some of the time in the AV world. We want to explore that out a little bit as well. Many of you know us here at Diversify from our AV experience, but you know, very much a relevant conversation to talk about security now and going forward, as it has been for many years, but it seems to be more and more important. So thanks again for joining. Just a few little housekeeping items. We'll be recording this session so that after the fact, in case you want to come back and revisit any of the topics, or for those that may not have been able to make it, we'll be able to view it later on. During the presentation and during the interview, we'll have the opportunity for others to jump in and ask questions. I'll pause between several times as we transition to make sure. And you know, if we're in the middle of a conversation and something comes to mind and you really want to dig into it, feel free to send us a question on using the chat feature. You know, at times the presenters may be discussing, and if you would, just make sure you point that to me or to all of the panelists, and I'll be monitoring that, making sure that we capture those questions, and at the very end we can circle back to those or any that we missed along the way. So again, thanks for joining, and let me jump into some introductions here and give everyone an opportunity to say hello to the audience. So Hani Mustafa is joining us. He's the Chief Executive Officer of Jazz Networks, and with a rich history in, like as I mentioned, video. Discovered earlier this afternoon in a little chat that it goes back even further than that, and maybe security is coming back home for him. You know, CCIE from very early on. So we'll welcome you, Hani, and look forward to talking to you today. On his team, yes. I think.
No, just thank you for having me.
Absolutely, glad for you to be here, and looking forward to the conversation. On his team, with him, you'll see him popping in and out of the screen. We didn't want to get too close on that laptop camera there. Alex Price, heading up the sales effort for Jazz, and then we'll hear from and maybe see Ron here in a little bit, but Ron Coe, sales engineer. He'll be walking us through a little bit of a demo today, and then. Again, I'm Nathan Jones. I'm the Director of Sales for ITS here at Diversify. So, you know, let's just jump right in. I want to kind of set the stage here. You know, there's a great deal of question in my mind when we engage with Jazz Networks, given the history of the company. But to set the stage for those that may not be that familiar with cybersecurity and some of the pieces of it, you know. Insider threat is a challenge, always has been a challenge, and it's becoming more and more of a challenge, right? Because it's a different kind of war. It's a different, it's not something that can be solved with, your typical anti-malware or security software and security devices, because you can't stop your users from using the network and using the assets of your company. But, you know, with all of that we have, all the focus that we have in the media and otherwise just around the world on cybersecurity these days, it's interesting to note that 54% of data breaches, so this is from the Information Security Forum, 54% of data breaches are accredited to insiders, right? McAfee puts that number at 43%. And regardless of whether you go with the 43 or the 54, it's a significant amount of breaches caused by insider threat. And we want to dig into that a little bit today. But, as we do, Hani, I just want to throw it out there and kind of open this up a little bit. I've alluded to it. I've hinted around about your history from Ken Berg and several of the other AV players. But, tell us a little bit about, what made you decide to go into cybersecurity and why now, and what's that looking like for you?
Yes, absolutely. So between me and the CTO, Simon Evans, who's based in London, if you ask both of us separately, we actually consider ourselves that we're coming back home when we thought about going back into cybersecurity. We started around 2 years ago, so August 2016. We're over 92 people right now, and we decided that there's a lot of things that need to change in the cybersecurity field, especially with regards to the DLP part. We thought that the way that data loss prevention is done right now is completely broken. I know it's a pretty bold statement, so I'll try to substantiate that throughout the session. And we felt that with the skill set that we have on board and the team that we have on board, we'll be able to address this issue. So even though we're only 2 years old, actually the relation between us, we know each other for the past 16, 17 years. We followed each other across different industries, so we have a heritage of, Tamberg, Cisco, Acano, Pexip, and we brought together this incredible skill set, both on the engineering side and on the commercial side, in order to try to solve and tackle this challenge.
So you mentioned that this is coming back home for you. You started out in cybersecurity and focused in that area. But this most recent stint with Tamberg and all the names that you just put out there, you guys were a major player in the UC space. So why now? Why move back into cybersecurity?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you take all the previous products that we have built over the years, behind them, the underlying infrastructure always required a security. Whether it's encryption or distributed systems, how can they communicate securely between themselves? So even though we were in video conferencing, we always kept our eye on the ball with regards to the security aspects of things. And when we were done with that part of our lives, we realized that under our umbrella we have skill sets that are quite unusual to have in the security space. And there are two main aspects to it. In order to deliver a product like the one we're delivering today, there are really two core skill sets. Actually, I would say three core skill sets that are required. One is the lower level kernel or system type of development. This is stuff that we have from building hardware and embedded systems from a previous life. And then we have the skill set of the big data and machine learning aspect of things, which really puts us in a unique position because most big data and ML guys, they don't want to work in security companies. A lot of them just want to go and work in the Amazons, the Googles of the world. But in Europe, somehow we have a slightly different environment. The gravity is less towards these bigger behemoths. So we're able to actually pull it off. And on top of that, you need the user experience skills that are, for some reason that I haven't really figured out, Scandinavia is quite good at. So bringing all this together allows us to provide a quite unique offering.
Yeah, I know from personal experience, I spent a couple of years in software development. The user experience, I'd say model or even the whole idea around it is fairly new within the United States. It's interesting that you see that advancement in Scandinavian design. And quite frankly, I don't want to spoil the surprise. We're gonna, we'll go through the demo here in a little bit. It's a beautiful tool, right? I mean, it's intuitive and just it works well. So, very good way to focus there. I would call myself a security. I wouldn't say enthusiast, but I've been in the IT industry for many years now, and I hear about it, I see it, I find it interesting, right? We talk about hackers and what they can do and how they go about it, right? And there's any number of examples of breaches or issues within large organizations in the news at any given moment. Can you give me a couple of examples maybe of some more recent ones that we would see in the news and how Jazz solution would have perhaps have prevented that or stopped the breach?
Oh, absolutely. So I think there are several. So I mean, we can start with perhaps the British Airways one. This caused quite a splash a couple of months ago, and it was a very interesting case because while British Airways lost quite a lot of data, the way it was done is such that the data never really entered British Airways premises. The data was siphoned out even before the data touched their backend servers or their databases. So in that particular case, what the attackers did is they managed to go in and change some of the code that is used to load the web page of British Airways. And when the customers went into British Airways to buy a ticket, some of this data was then siphoned out to another third-party site that British Airways had nothing to do with, which was controlled by the attacker. And this is how they got the credit card numbers, the CSV numbers, and were able to get the data. Now, what's interesting here is that if you use the traditional DLP approach to it, you would not have been able to catch that. And what you actually needed is something that allows you to, now, how could they have changed this file? Right, there are several ways that they could have potentially done that. The team that is analyzing this, they still have not come out with a detailed report, but we can hypothesize about how this could have happened. And there's a couple of ways. One is they could have directly attacked the server and then changed the file there. The other is they could have attacked an adjacent server and did a lateral movement from that server to the website that serves the code that is used to load the web page. And in both these cases, what you actually need is the ability to, two things, realize that something is weird, that something that is in the environment that is a little bit off, and at the same time have the ability to go back in time and zoom in into the 1 or 2 minutes of interest from a long period of data. Now, they've discovered this 2 months ago. This is probably something that have gone a little bit longer than that. And by the time they had discovered it, they would have needed to go back in time and find out what exactly happened. So our approach to it is more like get a lot of different input that we can then analyze to build profiles and find out that something is a little bit off and catch that. So I think this is one example. The more recent example of the healthcare breach that happened for direct enrollment, I think this is around 3 weeks ago or so. This was also, I think it was detected manually. The jury's still out about how that is done as well, because this is pretty recent. But the way it could have been detected there as well is about anomalous flows between servers and normal legitimate software doing and acting up in ways that is unusual.
So I mean, so you're looking at behaviors, not just of people, but of the files and of the systems themselves, and trying to predict what's happening.
Exactly. So you can call it a behavioral DLP or next-gen DLP. We're moving away from this idea of, spending a lot of time trying to build a typical DLP policy and then having that not being able to enforce it because it often always affects the normal workflow of people, and ending up with the maintenance period, which is you only see when something happens that violates the policy that you have drummed up over the past couple of months. We decided to turn the problem on its head, and instead we allow you to see everything that's happening, and we empower both the visualization and the operator with some heuristics, statistics, machine learning to slice and dice the data in different ways, and also provide you with insights that you can then react on pretty concretely.
Fascinating. It's great to know, to be able to determine what happened, but it really doesn't do a whole lot for us after the fact, I guess, right?
Right.
Just even thinking about the what you're saying there in terms of the machine learning and the predictive analytics, my mind immediately goes to, super technical, right? I've said before, I've made my living talking about stuff that I don't understand because I'm not the guy in the code, right? But, I think what I've had the ability to do is to be able to translate that into English, right? And so translate that into something that a non-technical person could understand. Do a lot of the tools out there, they're very technical in nature? I mean, I know the answer to this, that yours isn't, but I just want to get your perspective on, how easy it is for, for a user or an administrator to see these heuristics that you're creating.
Absolutely. So I'll tell you something, Nathan. I mean, the requirement for a nice user experience is it's not really a requirement. I think, especially in the security field, it's often a nice to have. I won't point out vendors, but there are a lot of vendors out there that have it's a very technical user interface. And what ends up happening is there's a whole ecosystem around it that actually benefits from how difficult it is to use. What we decided to do is do the investment of actually making the user experience easy. And the reason for that is, first of all, you have a shortage of cybersecurity professionals, so cybersecurity experts who can actually navigate these complex products. So we wanted to move it upstream and allow maybe a level 1 analyst or even HR or compliance to be able to use the tool productively before they engage somebody who's a security expert who's probably a very rare resource in a company. So that was part of our thinking. The other is the amount of data is, in order to present it in a way that is digestible, you really need to think deeply about the problems you're solving and how you want to make it as easy as possible to the user. And we wanted to do it from a single pane of glass that not only, like I mentioned, allow you to go back into the slivers of the 2 minutes of interest, but to also allow you to take action and proactively probe the different endpoints and servers to find out what happened there. Can I get more information? Is this a serious situation that I need to actively quarantine, isolate, or should I request multi-factor from the user? This kind of thing.
Yeah, we get overly secure. We prevent the users from being able to do what they're setting out to do, their job, right? So it's a balance, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah. I know you have Ron there with you, and we're gonna set some time aside for a demo. I'm thinking maybe we go ahead and go into that, and let's take a look at this, because I know from my perspective, what you're saying is exciting, and I want to get my hands on it, but there's nothing like seeing it, I guess, right? So
yeah, absolutely.
We go ahead and move over to Ron to kind of take us through the tool a little bit, so that our callers can see what this looks like, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit more after that. Let me pass the ball over to you here. How's that? All right, we got Ron up here.
Hey, how are you doing? I think I have the ball here.
You got it.
See that okay?
Got it. I can see it.
Excellent. Oh. So let me zoom out. Get a better view here. Awesome. Thanks, Nathan, for the time. There were a lot of points in the previous conversation where you talked about complexity, and we touched on coding practices and things of that nature. One of the things that you also highlighted was your first view of the platform and how easy it was to use, right? So here's the operator's view of the global infrastructure, and as you can see, there's not a lot of clutter, there's not a lot of noise. Very crisp, very clean, minimalist design, I think, is how we refer to it. We think that anyone stepping in front of this console for the first time with very, very basic instructions, can figure out where to go next. For example, with red being that universal color of, hey, you've got some challenges here, you can very quickly identify areas here on the map where we need to pay further attention. Now I'm going to zoom into a spot here, and we can see we've got users as well as computing objects represented here on the map. We have a full integration with the corporate directory, LDAP compliant directory, I should say, which makes it very easy to understand assets across the enterprise. Get a few more objects here. I can click on a grouping of computing objects here. I've got a list of desktops, one or two of which are in alarm, and I can quickly and easily click on any of these for further detail, and I'll do that in a second. Very quick and easy to change the point in time that I'm referencing. Right now I'm looking at a week's worth of data. I can reduce that down to today, and that'll change my data set very quickly, right? So I'm looking at 4 objects now. The time slider here at the bottom is also active, so I can use this to get more granular with that data set that I'm reviewing, or more broad, whichever my need happens to dictate. We have this notion of what we call the power search. Now, typically, what you find in tools in this space is the requirement to understand some sort of query language to get to the details that you're looking for, maybe some SQL, perhaps an elevated knowledge of cybersecurity concepts. We've approached that very differently. So right off the bat, as soon as you go into our power search, we see a few saved searches that my colleagues have created here, and we're giving you an indication of the number of objects within the environment that meet that criteria, even before you select one of these searches. Creating these searches is also simple, right? Again, no need to query the system with a bunch of random text. You can very visually walk through the power search creation to arrive at the details you're looking for. So for example, let's say I'm looking for users in the environment who might be visiting file sharing sites, and maybe they're saving content to USB drives. So I click 3 objects there. I'm going to widen my search just a bit. And now we've updated the world map, presenting the objects that meet those criteria. We give you a visual indication here at the top of the screen, letting you know how you've arrived at this data set. And again, you can click on any of these objects for further detail. Now, what you've seen me do so far, again, very simple. It masks a lot of power, however. For those power users in the environment, we do provide an advanced level of querying in a number of ways. You see here that we have almost an infinite number of properties that we're bringing to the surface for various objects throughout the system. Right, so I back up here, and for example, maybe I'm looking for a particular file within the environment. I can go here and say I want to search for files that, I don't know, on Windows we'll look for something like PowerShell, for example. Right? I happen to know that nothing in this data set meets that requirement, but this is how easy it is to create even a more advanced query in the solution. I'll pause there for just a second. Any questions?
I mean, I see the power of it in terms of, PowerShell, for example. I know there's often nefarious code hidden within PowerShell scripts and things like that, and so you can get down to that level. In one of the searches that you did there, you identified everyone that's visiting a file sharing site. Perhaps, I think we all have the opportunity and the business need to visit file share sites. Can you walk me through how that would, what would be an indication that it's an improper use of a file sharing site?
Great question. So our corporate policies, likely well defined. You can see that this is This is fairly detailed. So in a particular environment, if we actually have one here locally where their standard file sharing solution is Google Drive. So that's expected, no surprises if people are doing that. We ran this query for them, and we added a few more sites for them, and they were surprised to learn that there were 90% of the user population was also utilizing OneDrive. So infinitely customizable, very easy to tune that for a particular organization to filter out things that you expect would be the norm. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. That's great. That's great. You know, and I may not have mentioned at the beginning for any of our participants, if you do have a question, you have control of the mute. You can take yourself off and ask by all means. I don't see any in the chat at the moment, so yeah, Ron, if you'll by all means carry on through.
So, yep, I'll clear our searches out, and we'll draw a little point of demarcation here. What you've seen me do so far is sort of use the system in an interactive way. I kind of know what I'm looking for in a particular time frame. I know the kind of search I want to execute. I'm going to bring your attention now to more of the automation capabilities. Here in the upper left, I've got a badge with the number 7 in it, indicating that there are 7 alarms that the system's bringing to my attention. Now, it's not bringing these to my attention as a result of watching how operators are querying the solution over time or anything like that. This is evidence of that big data platform, machine learning engine at the center of the solution, analyzing information coming back from our agent, which we have deployed on the endpoints in the infrastructure, and bringing to the operator's attention those things that are unusual. And so we have 7 alarms here. You're looking at a summary view of 7 cyber passports or Jazz cyber passports. And we can get more detail simply by clicking on any of these. So we'll go into Ron here. This gives us a representation of Ron's passport. I get to understand all of the assets that are enrolled with Ron, or any devices, servers, etc., that he may have logged into through the course of his work. They would all be listed here. In this case, he happens to have only one. I get a representation of where this endpoint is on the planet. This one's in Austin, any Wi-Fi networks to which it is currently connected, and the foreground applications. The activity feed presents us with an aggregate of processes running on those endpoints, any connections that those processes have made, any files that they've touched, any DNS requests, etc. And when I present that, people are probably thinking, wow, that could be a pretty lengthy list, and that's a correct assessment. But let me show you how we break that down for you. If I click on this USB device, I'm going to do a couple of things. The system's going to do a couple of things for us. It'll summarize the sensors that were triggered that actually make up that alarm, giving us an opportunity to click on any of them for further detail. You see in this case we're getting the serial number for the USB device in question. It's the first time we've seen it in the organization. We get an understanding of any applications that may have been launched from this particular device, as well as a domain, in this case, that was queried for that process at launch. We now also filter that long list of activities and break down so that you only have to look at activities directly associated with that USB insert. And so again, looking at this a little bit differently, a little bit more detail here, we see the device name, that serial number again, and the vendor or manufacturer of the unit. We also see an indication here. The system has gone out and taken a look at other nodes or endpoints within the environment that may have encountered this device. So in this case, it looks like there are 2 others. All right, and we see that process launch again, and we can kind of walk through the list of activities here and understand how this particular incident really unfolded. We see that process touched a few files looks like some PDFs and some PowerPoints, followed by a DNS lookup to that destination in Russia, it would appear, which was followed by an outbound data flow. So an immense amount of detail. Clearly, this looks like an activity that that is certainly unsanctioned, and we'd like to prevent any further occurrences of this. Another hallmark of the platform is this ability to do something about what you're seeing here, right? All of this detail is effectively useless if you can't take action. So here in the same pane of glass, we go to our actions list, and we have a number of options here. We can force authentication, and maybe as a part of asking for that second factor of authentication, we also redirect to a reminder about acceptable use for corporate endpoints. Assuming, we think of this as a psychological deterrent, right? If somebody's knowingly doing something out of policy, they get this indicator that security operations can see what's happening, they're likely to stop that behavior, right? But let's assume that Ron is persistent. He sees the message, he successfully authenticates, but he continues the behavior. We have the opportunity to escalate our prevention efforts, so we can go ahead and isolate the endpoint, stopping all inbound and outbound network communications, and preventing new connections from forming. So this gives us an opportunity to reach out to Ron and now verbally reinforce corporate or acceptable use, and let's assume that he gives us an explanation that is satisfactory. We determine that perhaps we've acted a bit too hasty. In this same panel, we can go ahead and de-isolate that endpoint just as easily, letting you know, or an indication that that agent, even though we've severed network communications, that Jazz agent does maintain communications with the platform. And the ultimate hammer, if you will, we can go ahead and lock out the endpoint, no keyboard, no mouse, and requiring that it be returned to us for further analysis.
You can't use, so you can just absolutely shut a person or user down in the midst of the engagement.
We can absolutely do that. Correct.
That's fantastic. Ron, we have a question in from the audience, and John, if you want to open your mic, I see that you sent those, but there's quite a few in it. Maybe you want to frame that up for us. Perhaps John's muted out. I'll begin reading some of his questions off here to you, Ron. And I think it has to do with the user and the endpoints themselves. But what is the impact on the users for your device? And I guess the root of that is there a client that's downloaded onto the workstation, or does this run on a server somewhere?
There is an agent. So we install on Windows, on Mac, the various Linux distributions. We install an agent, a very lightweight agent that runs at the operating system kernel. And so, yeah, that is what maintains the communication with the platform that you're seeing here in the share, giving us this control and detail.
Now that agent reports back. Is that to your servers, or is this something that as the client here, I need to host on a VM platform, or perhaps even an AWS or something to that effect?
Great question. So there are a couple of deployment options for the solution. On-prem, so within your vSphere, you deploy the Jazz platform, and your agents are enrolled to that deployment, reporting back to your infrastructure, as we call it. We also have a cloud offering, which again is spun up in our cloud, but you are given a tenant of sorts, and again, your agents are reporting to your tenant within our cloud.
And one additional add-on here, and I think I've captured all of John's questions. Can this run on a Citrix environment?
It can, yes. Citrix, terminal services, yes.
Gotcha. John, thanks for the great questions. So Ron, clearly powerful, clearly easy to use, right? Which is, as we were talking this through and coming into this demo, what a big takeaway, right? We don't see that a lot in the security environment.
Yeah,
Did you have anything else that you wanted to show us with the tool, or?
Indeed. We have a couple of other visualizations we like to demonstrate. I'm going to zoom out here to get a little bit more data before I do that. We have this notion of graphing activity for an endpoint. So the same endpoint that is registered to Ron here, we now have the ability to view all sorts of information about his connections, bandwidth being utilized, file events, DNS requests, etc. We've also got a view here of the locations through which the endpoint has traveled in this histogram. Right? So in this case, it's just Austin, but you can imagine that if he were to travel through various different locations, the locations list would look very much like the applications. You'd see each destination depicted here in the graph. Similarly, any Wi-Fi networks to which he had connected along those travels would be articulated here, and you see a list of applications that he's running. It turns out that this list of applications actually is an enumeration of all the windows open on the system, with any sub-windows, for example, in Microsoft Outlook or your favorite web browser. You'd get a caret here next to the process name, allowing you to click to see all of the open objects under the application. And we see here indicated by the darker color here, applications that are running in the foreground versus those in the background. Taking this data and even getting a bit more granular, we can turn this on its side and look at our connections view. And so here we see by process how inbound connections are being made to Ron's endpoint as well as outbound connections. Now, this is even more interesting. You see these clouds depicted here on the right-hand side. I've got my agent running on Ron's endpoint, but obviously I'm not going to have that running on the destinations in the wild internet. But even with that, I can still tell you where those processes are reaching out and where they're terminating. Now here at the top is an indication of a destination where I do have my agent running here as well as on Ron's endpoint. And in that case, I can give you a process-to-process flow of the communications, as well as the ability to now walk the path of the communications flow. So we see Ron and various processes communicating in this manner. I can take this desktop and now click upon it to have a closer look at how it's communicating, right? So Ron's communication flow is here, and then it is also reaching out to various internet destinations. Make sense?
Absolutely. Super dynamic too. The visualization is fantastic. I can almost understand it. Says a lot.
Yeah, we wanted to show you one other thing about the graphs. I failed to mention that these are all active. So as I hover over various sections here, you can see that it dynamically updates and gives me additional info. I can use this to actually get more granular with the information I'm reviewing. So by clicking and dragging over a particular section on the graph, I'll let go and it will reformat not only the graph itself, but will also filter my activity feed accordingly, right? So I can continue to drill into data as deeply as I'd like to get a better understanding of what's happening.
Down to the byte.
Down to the byte.
That's fantastic. Super powerful. Let's open up the mic for any questions at this stage. I don't see any in the chat right now. Ron, thank you so much for walking us through that. Again, just a super powerful visualization. If you want to pass the ball back to me, we'll get back over to Hani here and ask a few more questions.
There you go. Should have it.
Yep, got it. We'll get the presentation back up here. So I found this, and in prepping for our conversation and just getting my mind attuned to insider threat and the significance of it, and I thought this was telling, right? When we think of, at least when I think of cybersecurity and related to federal agencies, I think of those as the most secure. And this is from a report from the Office of Management and Budget about cybersecurity. Agencies cannot detect when large amounts of information leave their network, right? And yet that's what your tool's doing. That's what we're accomplishing here with the JAS file. I thought that, or the JAS solution. I thought that was pretty interesting. But Hani, I want to ask a question. Cybersecurity is complicated. I've seen what I call the logo soup slides, right, of all the players in the market, and there's so many segments that are, from network security to endpoint security to user security, et cetera. It's a crowded space, right, and it's hard to differentiate within that. I know from an integrator perspective, from a consulting perspective, it's hard for us to determine, what are the right solutions and how do we help our clients build those out. With all of that, help us understand, what specifically and what makes you different in the marketplace and gives you the idea that you're going to be able to set this thing on fire here.
Yeah. So I think the key thing here is where is the best place to try to solve this problem? Like you said, there are many ways to try to tackle it. You could potentially sit passively on the network and try to analyze things that are going back and forth. You could potentially ingest the logs from a whole suite of different applications that are generating logs and try to analyze that and try to reconstruct the picture together. What we've decided to do is actually sit straight right next to the user in order to get as much information as we can around the context about a particular transfer. And I'll tell you why we thought this is necessary. If you take something as simple as trying to determine if there's a network scan, for instance, or if somebody's trying to send a lot of data. Let's take the network scan first. If you open a Chrome browser and go to CNN.com or any reasonably busy website, you will actually end up generating a lot of connections, north of 100 different connections, just loading the different images, advertising, websites, what have you. And if you're just sitting passively on the network, you have no way of really knowing, is this actually somebody scanning or is it somebody who's loaded a website? Now this is a simplified example, but what you really need to do is to not only see the packets as they're going back and forth, you almost want to stamp every packet to know that this packet was generated by this user and this application and this version of the application. And this allows you to, when you're building the profiles, to actually understand more about how likely it is that this connection is weird or if this is normal behavior. And you have the same thing if you just take any sort of network transfer. In order to find out whether this is somebody who's trying to do a distributed Windows update from one machine to the next, or if somebody's actively running an exploit from one machine to an adjacent machine on the same network, you actually need to know who's generating that connection, which application is doing it. Is it an exploit or is it actually a legitimate piece of software? So this is really our differentiation. Over and over again when we're doing the demo, people and we go through the POCs and the deployments, people repeatedly just say, we've never seen anything like this in terms of the visibility of giving us the power to see what happens on their endpoints. Because this not only covers when endpoints are on your own network, even if the user is at home or on the road, on VPN or off VPN, or even offline, we keep recording everything that is happening, and eventually we analyze it. We try to do it in real time if possible. If there is no connection for whatever reason, such that if the user is offline, we still record it and still analyze it after the fact. And you can't really have this comprehensive visibility without sitting right on the laptop, basically. And this is kind of this is the road that we decided to take in order to try to solve the problem in the best and most comprehensive way.
I mean, it's fantastic, and it makes a lot of sense. Can you tell me, just in a brief statement, or I don't know if brief is the right word to put it, but in simple, straightforward, why would a customer buy Jazz today? Why are customers seeking you out?
So number one, they either have a DLP solution that no longer works, or they just realize that after spending a lot of time building the policy, they can't really enforce it, so they're just leaving what they have, and they're seeing only the events that are visible after that policy is violated. So they realize that it's not really working in a preventative capacity. So they don't have the visibility that they want, and they can't answer the questions that they have. So if they want to find out, for instance, show me all files that have been copied to my USB disk, or all files that have been touched, all the users that have touched a particular file, or even for GDPR purposes, show me all users that are resident outside of, let's say, Europe, who touched a particular file. They really have no way of doing this kind of visibility. So this is one aspect of it. The other is some users for forensic aspect, just understanding that, okay, I have a full a full sales force out there, a distributed sales force on the road or working from home. Now these guys are really not passing through any of my traditional security perimeter devices or security network elements that I have, and I have no idea what they're doing with the company assets or the company's crown jewels. And for them to really understand what's happening there and to be able to hold people accountable. So there's that aspect as well.
You talk about the road warriors. It brings to mind the mobile device, right? And John from the audience actually asked the question: have you or will you be developing an SDK for mobile usage, or can you also, or is there an agent already available that can be on a mobile device?
Right. So we've looked at this problem quite a bit. The way we're trying to tackle it now is, again, focusing on the data crown jewels of a company. We're integrating with some of the cloud services, if you have Office 365, Google Drive, to be able to get access information directly from these cloud services. So even if you access a Google Drive file from, let's say, your mobile phone, we would still be able to see it from a single pane of glass. If you happen to access it from your laptop, we will see it from two different sources, and you'll be able to really build a good picture. So the cloud will tell you that, Nathan has opened this file, but then the agent will tell you he's opened it using Excel and using this version of Excel, for instance, right? So you'd be able to build a more complete picture. So this is how we're trying to cover the visibility on the mobile side. In terms of having an agent directly on the mobile, the jury's still out on this, what's the best way to do this is. Apple tends to be quite restrictive in what you can do on its platform, so we're still trying to figure out the best way to solve this.
Gotcha. That makes total sense. I feel like I'm monopolizing the conversation. I want to open up the mics, and we've got quite a few people on. Some questions coming in through chat, but is there anyone else out there that has a question that you'd like to ask?
Hey,
one of the fantastic. Go ahead.
Hey, yeah, this is Jeremy. I just wanted to ask if you could provide some more detail around your actual deployment of the agent. If I were to purchase the product.
Right. So So the actual deployment mechanism, how you would deploy the agent on different laptops and servers, right?
Correct. Yeah. Just kind of just walk me through the whole deployment process.
Right. So if you take the cloud instance, we start off by we spin up an instance for you. You get an MSI executable for Windows. For Linux and Mac, you get an installer. Let's focus on the Windows one since that's the more traditional one. Normally, a lot of companies have either Microsoft Intune or SCCM or Casey or something that allows them to push these MSI files across the whole network. So you push the agent using that mechanism of choice that you use in your to push normal software on your network. And on top of that, you also have some sort of crypto credentials that allow every single agent to then produce certificates and deploy the full PKI. And this allows us to have TLS across the whole organization for all the communication channels. And once that is done, that's it. All your users will pop up on the map, and you'll be able to dig in and slice and dice the data. For Linux and Mac, it depends on if you have your own orchestration there, you can do the same. You can use the same thing. So on Linux, if you have Ansible or Puppet, or Mac if you have JAMF.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Hani, there's another question here from Bill via chat. Companies like Darktrace are making a lot of noise in this space. So, what would a network-based approach miss in comparison to the Jazz approach?
Right. So a couple of things. First, the deployment to have anything similar to what I just described, you need one of these boxes in every single location, at least one of these boxes in every single location. If you have a location that is quite complicated or consists of multiple LAN segments, you actually need to set up multiple, span ports or multiple boxes or remote span. There's a whole bunch of issues with that deployment. But once that is done, you need it in every single location. Once that part is done, you only get network flows, and you can only see what happens inside of unencrypted connections, such as SMB traffic that is unencrypted. But anything else is visible. What you will miss is completely any endpoint activity that, whether it's file events, you'll never be able to see local file events, for instance. You won't be able to see if somebody is doing something locally on his laptop that has no effect on the network. Even worse, if the user suddenly decides to switch on his phone to a 4G hotspot, you will bypass all the mechanisms that are in place on your local network. So because you're going effectively in a completely different path, so nothing will be seen there, even network traffic that you would have normally seen. Not to mention, of course, if you're working from home, you don't see any of that either. Now, that's the benefit of really running on the laptop is you can see, USB devices going in. You could see web traffic as well. So it's just the difference in the level of visibility is significant. And it doesn't take a lot of convincing really to explain that because the proof is in the pudding. You can just show it to the customer and he will immediately realize that the level of visibility that he's getting is unmatched.
Fantastic. I don't see any other questions in the chat queue, and we're coming up to the top of the hour. I want to make sure that we end on time to be respectful both of your time, Hani, and the team, and everyone that's joined us today. I just want to say thank you for joining. I mean, it's been a fascinating conversation, even the pre-conversation leading up to it. I enjoyed talking with you and looking forward to engaging in many opportunities ahead.
Nathan, thank you so much for having us. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, and Ron and Alex, thanks for joining. And for everyone on the call, we greatly appreciate you spending the portion of your Friday afternoon listening to us and all of the new advances in insider threat detection. You know, for anybody that is on the webinar, you have the opportunity to take advantage of a couple of things. We have a security posture assessment where we'll spend some time with our top-level security experts and through some interviewing process, help you determine where there may be some weaknesses within your security portfolio. And then also you have the opportunity to sign up and get a trial of the Jazz solution, and that can be both either or cloud or an on-prem proof of concept. I've given an email address here for you to just reach out to us if you're interested in one or both of those. Everyone on the call will receive an email afterwards with this information as well, but just in case, I wanted to have it up. Again, you know, just Hani, thank you for the time. I know you're on a North American tour here and going from coast to coast and have a very busy schedule, so we appreciate you taking the time to chat with us for a little bit.
Thank you so much, Nathan.
All right, and everyone, thanks. Have a wonderful weekend. Stay dry and stay warm. We'll take care.